Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadyasya Yato Anvayadi Taratascha Artheshu Abhigyaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yat Surayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Sargomrisha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amrita Dravasanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. So now we enter the fourth chapter of the ninth Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is a very special chapter because it has the story of a very famous devotee called Ambarish. Before we go to the story of Ambarish, there is the story of Nabhaga, and his son is Nabhaga. So we saw the 8 sons of Manu. 2 sons remaining are Nabhaga and Ikshvaku. Ikshvaku is the first and the main son, who is described by Shuka Brahmarshi last, because his lineage is a very important lineage that goes all the way to Lord Sri Ram and many other great personalities such as Bhagirath, Sagar, and so on. So before coming to Ikshvaku, he finishes the 9th son, who is Nabhaga. So he says, Nabhaga was the son of Manu as well, and he had a son called Nabhaga. And interestingly, this Nabhaga was the youngest son of Nabhaga. And he spent a long time learning in his guru's ashram as a religious student, learning the Vedic scriptures and spiritual wisdom. All his elder brothers came back very early, but he is the youngest brother, and yet he was the most pious, so he stayed for a long time. And meanwhile, what happened was the elder brothers, they came back and they got older, and the father was very old, so they decided to divide the property among themselves, and they did not leave any share of the ancestral property for the youngest son who is studying. So when he comes back, he asks them, he learns that they have divided all the parts, and he asks them, what have you set aside for me? And they say very flippantly, we have assigned our old father to you. So they have taken all his possessions. So this is what happens when the father has wealth and the sons are scheming. They only are interested in his property and not the father himself, who is old now. So they, considering the youngest son, who is very spiritual and very pious, to be the right one to be burdened with their old father while they can walk away with all the properties, they say, you can take care of the old father, and that is the part assigned to you. So this son Nabhaga very innocently approached his father and says, the elder brothers have said that you are my share, O dear father. So the father says, don't listen to them. They are, of course, so manipulative and cheating. I will take care of you. And then he says, there is a bunch of brahmanas, priests, who are followers of the sage Angira, and they are performing a big sacrifice. And during the ritualistic course, they may make some mistakes. So if you go there, since you are very learned in Vedic scriptures, you go there and you teach them a couple of suktas, which are hymns, and that will help them ascend to heaven. And when they do so, they will leave all the wealth in the sacrifice here, and you can take all of that. So here we see that the priests who are engaging in such sacrifices are only interested in heaven. This is why it is said that many of the karma kanda, that is the sacrifices given in Vedas, are only meant for getting heaven, which is a temporary place where one can enjoy for some time and then come back, but it doesn't give permanent salvation. But that's what these brahmanas were interested in. So listening to his father, he goes there, and just as he was told, the sages there, or the priests there, the brahmanas, they are engaging in this yajna, and this boy Nabhaga, who's a young man now, he helps them with some mantras and suktas, and because of that they are able to ascend to heaven, and they leave all the property that is there right at the sacrifice for him to take. So when he is about to take that, because he is left with nothing else, so he listened to his father, he did what he was told. And now he is about to take that. At that time, a dark looking person comes, which is Lord Shiva in disguise. So the Lord Shiva, or Lord Rudra, he comes there in disguise and says, all this wealth on the sacrificial ground, you cannot take it because it belongs to me. And then he reveals that he is Rudra. So the young son, now he doesn't know what to do. He says, but I was told by my father, as well as the Brahmanas who did the sacrifice here, that it is meant for me. Then Rudra said, okay, let's go to your father and find out from him, because he is a wise man. So they both go back to the father, and the father Nabhaga, who's the son of Manu, as we saw, so he listens to what has happened, and then he reminds his son Nabhaga that the right owner of any wealth left in a sacrifice, in fact, is Shiva. If he did not come, only you can take it, but if he has come, then it belongs to him, because right after Daksha Yajna happened, which we saw back in the fourth Skandha, it was said that whatever sacrifice happens and any wealth is left after the sacrifice, that is meant only for Rudra. He deserves all the wealth. So the Shruti also, that's why says, Ucheshana Bhago Vai Rudraha. So Rudra gets all the leftover wealth from any sacrifice. So because of that, the rightful owner is Shiva. So his father, again Nabhaga, even though he told his son that he'll get all the wealth, now that Shiva has come in the form of Rudra, he being a very honest man, Nabhaga, he says, "Oh son, I'm sorry, because uh, the wealth in the sacrifice rightfully belongs to Rudra. I didn't think he would come. Since he has come, he only deserves all that wealth." So Nabhaga, he is a very obedient son. So he listens to his father and says, that is absolutely fine, father. And then he turns to Shiva and says, the wealth left on the sacrificial ground is definitely yours, because my father says so. And therefore, please accept it and give me your grace. So this is the quality of this son. So we see how all the other sons of Nabhaga, the elder sons, were all only interested in his property and had no wealth of character. Whereas here, the youngest son, he has the wealth of character, but he didn't have any material wealth. And whatever material wealth his father said he can get from the sacrifice is taken away by Rudra, and he does not mind at all. He listens to his father and he says, absolutely, so it's fine, I can absolutely take care of things, because this is the right thing to do. So, listening to all this, Rudra is very pleased. Rudra was, of course, also doing this as a pastime. So, he says, your father has spoken what is right, and you have also done what is right. You have spoken the truth. So I am pleased by both of you. And therefore, he says, I shall impart to you the supreme wisdom of Brahmagyana. Because this boy Nabhaga has learned all the Vedic mantras and various practices and so on, but the final and the most important wisdom of pure self realization was what was missing, and Shiva comes and blesses it to him. It says, Yatte pitavata dharmam tvam cha satyam prabhashase dadami te mantra drishe jnanam brahma sanatanam. He says, I'll give you the sanatana brahma jnanam, that is the eternal wisdom of pure consciousness, pure awareness, the eternal self, and thereby you shall be free. And not only that, Rudra says, whatever wealth is here, which of course belongs to me, I gift it to you as well. So this was all a test played by Shiva in the form of Rudra, and this boy Nabhaga was so virtuous and so obedient to his father as well, that Shiva was very pleased, and he gave all the wealth, and not only that, he gave the highest wealth of God realization. So Shuka Brahmarshi says this story is very blessed story to listen to, and just listening to this story and emulating Nabhaga gives us the highest score. So having narrated this story, now he moves on to the other most important story of this chapter, which also continues in the next chapter, which is the son of Nabhaga, who's called Ambarisha. So we saw that Nabhaga, being such a pious person, his son Ambarisha is an eminent devotee of the Lord. He is so pious and he is absolutely virtuous. So it is said, Nabhagad Ambarisho Abhut Mahabhagavata. So he became a Mahabhagavata, this Ambarisha, who is the son of Nabhaga. And Shuka Brahmarshi says he was such a great devotee that when he was given with a curse by the great sage Durvasa, even that punishment, that curse, did not have any effect, which is unheard of. So when this is said by Shuka Brahmarshi as a teaser, Parikshit of course is very curious. So he says, "O great sage, I long to hear about the royal sage Ambarisha and how he was able to not be affected by the curse of Durvasa." He says, Bhagavan Shrotumichami Rajarishes Tasya Dhimatah. He says, I want to hear more about this wise, virtuous, kingly sage. So now Shuka Brahmarshi continues the story. He goes into the depth of Ambarisha's beautiful story. It's one of the most famous stories of Bhagavatam that brings out the highest principle of devotion. And therefore he says, Ambarisha became a great king. So the son of Nabhaga, having inherited all the wealth from Rudra, and eventually his son Ambarisha became a great king, and he was having dominion over the entire globe. And yet it is said that Ambarisha regarded everything just like objects in a dream, without any sense of attachment, recognizing the impermanence of all the wealth. So normally people fall prey to the infatuation of wealth, even if there is little bit. But here it is said that Ambarisha was completely unattached. It says, Mene ati durlabham pumsam sarvam tat swapna samstutam. So swapna samstutam means like a dream. He regarded all the wealth, the kingdom, every riches he has just like a dream. And therefore he was not attached to it. He was simply doing his duty unattached. And he had only pure devotion to Lord Vasudeva and his devotees, because of which all this wealth simply appeared to him like just a piece of earth, as in nothing of great value compared to the wealth of true devotion. It says, Vasudeve Bhagavati tad bhakteshu cha sadhushu prapto bhavam param vishwam yena idam loshtavat smritam. Because of this devotion to Vasudeva, the whole of his wealth seemed like a clump of earth. So he fixed his mind exclusively on the lotus feet of Krishna, it is said, and every sense he is engaging only in Krishna and remembering Bhagavan. So this is the beauty of sense regulation through devotion. So normally the yogis try to regulate the senses by controlling them, by not making the senses go outwardly, and it is a very difficult proposition because the senses are of the nature of going out. And that is why we see that many yogis, and even there are stories of munis who after a long time of sense control get tempted and fall for temptation. Whereas the way of Bhagavata, which is what Ambarisha lives by, is engaging the senses, not controlling them, but engaging the senses in devotion. So it is said that he engaged every single sense in devotion to the Supreme Being. So it says he fixed his mind on the lotus feet of Krishna. He spoke, his words and his speech was used in glorifying the virtues of Lord Vaikuntha. And all these beautiful names of Hari are given with each of his senses. So mind is on Krishna, his words and his speech are recounting Vaikuntha. His hands were engaged in sweeping the temple of Sri Hari. His sense of hearing was engaged in hearing the stories of Lord Achyuta. All of these are names of the same one Supreme Being, Narayana, Hari, Krishna. So beautifully, we will see the verses, they are so poetic. He says, then he employed his eyes in seeing the deities of Mukunda. He employed his sense of touch in touching the lotus feet of the servants of the Supreme Being. He engaged his sense of smell in smelling the glorious sacred tulasi leaves offered to the lotus feet of Bhagavan, and his sense of taste was engaged in eating only prasadam. So he says here, Savai Manaha Krishna Padara Vindayor Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunanu Varnane. So his mind is in Krishna Padaravind, the lotus feet of Krishna. Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunanu Varnane. His speech is only in glorifying the Lord of Vaikuntha. Karau Harer Mandiram Arjanadishu. So the hands are only engaged in cleaning the temple of Hari. Shrutim cha kara achyuta sat kathodaye. His listening is only in listening about the stories of Achyuta, the immortal Krishna. Mukunda Lingalaya Darshane Drishav. His eyes were engaged in seeing the form of Mukunda in the temple. Tad Bhritya Gatra Sparshe Anga Sangamam. So the sense of touch was used in touching and serving the lotus feet of the devotees. Granam cha tat pada saroja saurabhai Srimat Tulasya. His sense of smell was engaged in smelling incense and in tulasi leaves. Rasanam tadarpite. And his sense of taste was only in tasting prasadam. Furthermore, he says his feet were engaged in going to the holy sacred places of Bhagavan, such as Mathura and so on, consecrated to the Lord Sri Hari. His head was engaged in bowing to the lotus feet of Rishikesha, of Krishna, and thereby every sense was engaged only in serving Krishna. It says, Padav Hare Kshetra Padanu Sarpane, Shiro Hrishikesha Padabhivandane, Kamam cha dasye natu kama kamyaya, yato uttama shloka janashraya ratihi. And therefore, because he was engaging every sense in this way, it is said that he did not covet any offering except that which was offered to Krishna, and that was only to get the grace of Krishna, grace of Bhagavan, not for any sensual gratification. So every sense was only engaged in tasting, smelling, hearing, speaking, moving. So all the senses of perception and action were engaged only in serving and glorifying Krishna and his devotees, and therefore his senses did not look for any kind of sense gratification at all. And because of that, it is said that he did everything only with attachment for the servants of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, surrendering all his duties to the Supreme Lord, who is above sense perception and whose worship is the highest sacred activity, he ruled the kingdom with great devotion as instructed by the great sages. It says, Evam sada karma kalapamatmanaha pare adiyagne bhagavati adhokshaje sarvatma bhavam vidadan mahimam tannishta viprabhihita shashasaha. It says, therefore, fully surrendered to Bhagavan, fully surrendering all his activities without any sense of doership, and engaging his mind completely in Bhagavan, who is beyond all senses, Adhokshaja, and listening to the counsel of the great sages such as Vasishta, and having the sense of seeing the same self within all beings as Bhagavan, and thereby serving through ruling, not considering him to be the king, the ruler, but a servant of the people. In this beautiful way, he was serving, and that way he was ruling the kingdom. And it is said that he did many sacrifices by the river Saraswati, and he gave abundant riches to the Brahmanas, to all the free priests and all the sages. He gave a lot of rich gifts, dresses, and various gifts such as grains and cows and money and all the rest. He gave very generously, and because he was doing everything generously, he was also blessed by all the sages. So this is the way to engage in any puja or any activity without calculating. When one can afford it, to do it with full heart and make everyone engaging in the puja, that is the priests and those who have come to eat or come to observe the puja, feed them very generously, and thereby everybody is happy and the whole place is filled with positive vibes. This is how Ambarisha conducted all his sacrifices. And because of that, it is said that in his kingdom nobody was interested even in heaven, because they were all only interested in listening to the stories of the Supreme Being. It says, Vargo na prartito yasya manujair amarapriyaha Strunvadbir upagayadbir uttama shloka cheshtitam. So all the people of his country too, because of the quality of the king, it is said As the king, so the people. In Sanskrit it is said yatha raja tatha praja. So as the king, so the people. So because the king was so pious, the people were also not interested in even celestial regions or any sensual pleasures, but they were only interested in listening to and singing the glories of Bhagavan, of the Supreme Being, and the pleasures of the senses, which are what even many great yogis even covered. There are many yogis who are engaged in siddhis, attaining various siddhis through which they can engage in material powers. None of this and none of the pleasures was coveted by the people even, because everybody saw Lord Mukunda in their heart. It is said, Durlabha napi siddhana mukundam hridi pashyatah. So Mukunda, another name of Bhagavan, the one who gives liberation, he was perceived in the hearts, and because of that, nobody was interested in anything else. And with this level of devotion, propitiating the Supreme Lord with great surrender, love, devotion, and asceticism, and while performing all his duties perfectly, the king gradually was free of all attachments. It is said, Sa ittam bhakti yogena tapoyuktena parthivaha swadharmena hariprinan sangan sarvan shanay jahav. So it said he by and by he had no attachment, even the little trace, whatever could have been there was all gone, because he was engaged in bhakti yoga tapoyuktena, that is in loving devotion with asceticism and austerities, engaging in his duties, swadharma. And because of that, it is said that he saw everything around, his wife, his children, his houses, his people, his elephants, his chariots, his jewels, his ornaments, his treasuries. It is said everything he saw them simply as unreal, as just as we already saw, as like objects in a dream. So he just treated them as that which belongs to Bhagavan, the material energy of the Bhagavan, which is impermanent, and the only permanent abiding truth is Bhagavan himself. And this energy, the material energy Maya, which also manifests as dream, also manifests as waking state, and therefore he did not take any objects in the waking state any more seriously than those which appear in the dream state, and he was only engaged in devotion to the substrate of all this, the source of all this energy, which is Bhagavan. And because of that, it is said, pleased with his exclusive devotion and love, Bhagavan Sri Hari gave him his own discus Sudarshana as his protection. So this is a very significant thing. Normally the chakra Sudarshana is always with Bhagavan, but Ambarisha is such a great devotee that it was given to him for his personal protection. So a form of Sudarshana is given here, which is always residing in his kingdom and protecting him. It says, Tasma adada harish chakram Pratyanika Bhayavaham Ekanta Bhakti Bhavena Prito Bhrityabhirakshanam. Because of his Ekanta Bhakti Bhava, that is his single pointed devotion, he was given the protection of Sudarshana Chakra, by which all the devotees are protected and all his foes are never able to even approach him. So, this being the background of the great Ambarisha, it is said that he once was engaged in Ekadashi fast. So, Ekadashi fast is the fasting that happens on the 11th day of every lunar fortnight. That is 11th day after full moon or 11th day after new moon. And this particular one was happening in the month of Kartika, which is a great coincidence because today happens to be the first day of the month of Kartika in the lunar calendar. And that is exactly when this particular incident is happening. So, on the Ekadashi day of Kartika month, he fasted, and the next day, Dwadashi, he took a bath in the river Yamuna, which is by the uh, area of which is Mathura, and there, having bathed and having done all the necessary ablutions as well as then doing abhishek, that is decorating and giving offering the deity of Keshava, the various offerings, paraphernalia such as sandal paste and flowers and scented water and so on, his mind was completely absorbed in Bhagavan. And after offering all the articles of worship and honoring all the Brahmanas that have come there, then he gifted them whatever they would like. He gifted them cows and milk and so on. And he fed the Brahmanas too, who were all given very excellent looking cows and given very opulent food to break the fast. So here it is said, Ariradhayushuhu Krishnam Mahishya Tulyashilaya. So, in order to propitiate Krishna, the all enchanting Bhagavan, along with his wife, it is said, he engaged in this particular vrta. It says, Vritante Kartike Masi Triratram Samuposhitaha Snatah Kadachit Kalindyam Harim Madhuvane Archayat. So, as we saw in this month of Kartik, Vritante Kartike Masi, after finishing his fast, he took a bath in Kalindi, which is another name for Yamuna, which is sacred to Sri Hari. Then it is said, Maha Abhisheka Vidina Pujayamasa Keshavam. So he did worship of Keshava with Abhisheka, offering all the various articles of worship. And then, as we saw, he offered, after offering this opulent worship, he offered various gifts to the Brahmanas who came there, gave them an excellent meal to break their fast. And after that only, in keeping with the right procedure, he was about to take his meal to break the fast. So when he was about to do so, it is said that at that very moment when he was about to break his fast by taking a meal, after having served everyone, which is again the right tradition, the right etiquette to first serve all the guests and then take the food last. So when he was about to take the food last, at that very moment, the great sage Durvasa came. It said, Tasya tarhi atitihi saksha Durvasa Bhagavan abhut. So the great sage Durvasa landed at his door exactly at that moment. So, of course, he cannot take his food now. So he kept his food aside and honored the great sage who has come. And he offered him high seat and he worshipped him. And after that, he asked him also to take food before he would take his food. But Durvasa instead said, yes, I'll be happy to take food, but I haven't done my ablutions yet. So I will go to the river, do my ablutions and come, and then I will take my food. So it is said, he went there. He said, Nimamajja Brihadhyayan Kalindi Salile Shubhe. So in the sacred river Kalindi, Yamuna, Durvasa took a bath and then he sat in meditation. But because of that, he lost track of time. But here, time was running away because there is an injunction that after Ekadashi fasting on the 11th day, that is, the lunar fortnight, the 12th day morning, Dwadashi, the fast has to be broken within a particular time. It's normally not later than 10 o'clock in the morning. It changes every time, but it is somewhere around the time. So it is said that the time was running out because he had spent all his morning in taking care of all the other guests, doing his puja, then his guests, and now with this Durvasa, he honored him too, and now he is waiting for him, and hardly 20 minutes were left, and Ambarisha was now in a quandary. So this is what is called as Dharma Sankata, because he didn't know what to do. Both are dharmas. One dharma is to wait for the atithi, the guests, to come before eating. Other dharma is to eat the meal and break the fast at the right time, and both are important. So here he is confused because of this. So he consults with the Brahmanas, with the sages there, and then he comes to a conclusion that he can take care of both by having water, because it is said that water is both considered as food and not food. So Ekadashi is when ideally one fasts even without water. It's called Nirjal. So by having water, the fast is broken, and at the same time it is not food, therefore it is not that he has eaten anything. So coming to this conclusion, he says, I'll break my fast with water alone, and therefore just before the muhurta, the time runs out, he takes water and breaks the fast. Meanwhile, the sage Durvasa returns from the bank of Yamuna and he is greeted by the king. But the sage Durvasa is known for his anger, Of course, his anger has got an interesting quality. It brings out the greatness of the devotees through his anger. So, in an indirect way, he helps in glorifying the devotees. So, here also, he acts in a very unreasonable way on the face of it, because he is getting extremely angry, knowing that Ambarisha has broken the fast without waiting for him, which of course Ambarisha had no choice whatsoever, and still he had only water. But without giving any consideration to that, Durvasa got so angry. It is said his limbs were shaking, his eyes became red, he became raging, and he first cursed this king. He said, "Look at him, he has violated Dharma. He did not even wait for his guest, who is a great sage like me. He's intoxicated with fortune, he doesn't have true devotion." So, all of these were extremely harsh words he spoke, which were, of course, completely undeserving to the great Mahabhagavata Ambarisha. And then he turned to the king and he says, "I am going to teach you a lesson for this." And therefore, he takes a piece of hair from his head and utters a mantra, his power, by which it becomes an evil spirit called Kritya, and that evil spirit is fire embodied and it is coming to kill him, as it were. So, this is how Durvasa is showing his anger. Not only did he curse him, he is sending out an evil spirit of fire to kill Ambarisha for an extremely petty reason, which is not even a valid reason. But here, all of this glorifies Ambarisha, because Ambarisha first took all his consideration in not eating until everyone is gone, and then he waited for Durvasa, and then he had only water to ensure that he didn't break the dharma of waiting for the guest. And despite all that, he was given this most undeserving treatment. Normally, people would complain, people would protest, people would say this is not fair, argue. But we see the greatness of Ambarisha here. He neither did he defend, nor did he get afraid, nor did he become disturbed. He simply remained silent and calm, it is said. So, this is the true quality of a Bhagavata. Neither was he defending himself, nor at the same time was he afraid of the powers of Durvasa. He knew that he has done the right thing, and he knew there is nothing he can explain, so he simply remained calm. So, this is the greatness of him, and because he remained calm like this, it is said at that time, as we already saw, he has the Sudarshana Chakra that is meant to protect him. The Sudarshana Chakra came instantly out of nowhere and it burned the evil spirit. The evil spirit that itself was fire, it was in turn burned. In other words, the evil spirit was completely demolished by the Sudarshana Chakra. So it is said, just as a snake is burned by a wildfire, this evil spirit was burned. And not only was the evil spirit burned, immediately the discus turned around and started attacking the sage. So, as we saw, this discuss, this Sudarshana Chakra is meant for protecting Ambarisha. Ambarisha is such a great devotee. We saw his qualities. We saw how every aspect of his life is dovetailed towards devotion. Being a great king, he did not have any sense of proprietorship or ownership. He was only a servant. He engaged all his senses in only serving the Lord. He did not see any of his possessions as permanent or as his. He saw them as temporary and fleeting. He engaged every activity with dharma, and because of his greatness, his whole kingdom was engaged in dharma. All the people were engaged in devotion and surrender. So, such a great being was given, therefore, the protection of Sudarshana Chakra. And Durvasa, the sage, comes here and tries to curse this great being, and because of that, the Sudarshana Chakra, which is meant to protect him and meant to destroy his foes, turns against Durvasa himself after killing this evil spirit. Now Durvasa is in big trouble because he starts running, and this discus is coming behind him. It is said that no matter where he goes, it is coming near him. It's not killing him because it is only warning him, but it is not letting him go either. It is coming so close to him that it's almost about to kill him, but it's just chasing him. So he is running. So Durvasa runs to all quarters, to various regions. As we saw, he has mystic powers. So he does not only runs around on earth, he uses his powers to go into sky, it chases him there. He goes to the subterranean regions, it chases him there. He goes into the oceans, it chases him there. He goes wherever he goes, it is chasing him there. Finally, he decides, I have to go to Brahmaloka, the realm of Brahma. And when he then uses his mystic powers to go to Brahmaloka, there also it comes and he falls at the feet of Brahma. But Brahma there, beautifully, he says, listen, O Durvasa, you have to know that after two parardhas, we already saw that one day of Brahma is 1,000 kalpas and Brahma lives for 100 years, which makes two parardhas. And after that, even Brahma is dissolved. So Brahma only lives for a really long time, but he is also only a created being who goes through creation and destruction just as all of the universe. And therefore, Brahma says, even I vanish when the Lord finally dissolves the whole universe at the end of the two parardhas. And therefore, we have no power. We all submissively obey the law of the Supreme Being. So I have nothing to offer you. He says, there is nothing I can do for you. This is the weapon of the Supreme Lord, who is the creator, sustainer, and dissolver, destroyer of the whole universe, where even we are all part of that creation and dissolution ultimately, and therefore I cannot help you. Then it is said, he goes to the abode of Shiva. So it says, Pratyakyato virinchene Vishnu Chakro patatitah Durvasa Sharanam Yata Sharvam Kailasa Vasinam. So then he decides, I need to go to Kailasha, the abode of Shiva. So he goes to Kailasha and he again appeals to Shiva. But Shiva also says, O Durvasa, listen, we have no power in front of the infinite, all pervading Supreme Being, because the Supreme Being and his weapon Sudarshana is so mighty that nobody can do anything about it. We all are only in service of this Supreme Being, and therefore we cannot do anything about it. And further he says, myself, the sages Sanat Kumara and Narada, Brahma himself, Kapila, and so many other great sages, nobody is able to. So all these beings he listed are all great beings, and yet he says none of these great beings can penetrate ultimately the supreme Maya. And in fact, we saw this in a subtle way even in the 8th Skandha, where when Bhagavan took the form of Mohini avatar, Shiva instantly fell for it just for a brief instant before he recovered. And therefore, Shiva is a topmost being, and yet Shiva says, even I can fall for this Maya at times, because this is the weapon of the Supreme Lord of the universe. Therefore, you have to go and seek his protection. He says, Tameva Sharanam Yahi Hariste Sham Vidhasyati. So now he realizes that I have no hope whatsoever to go anywhere else, because Durvasa was trying to avoid going to Bhagavan because he thought Bhagavan's Sudarshana Chakra is attacking him, so why would he protect me? So he thought he can find some other way through Brahma and through Shiva. Nothing helped him. So then he realized that I have to go to the Supreme Being. With his mystical powers, it is said he goes to Vaikuntha where the Lord resides, and he goes to the abode of the Supreme Being right there. So it says very beautifully, Tato Nirasho Durvasa Padam Bhagavato Yayau Vaikunthakyam Yadadhyasate Srinivasa Sriyasaha. So he goes to Vaikuntha where Srinivasa, the Supreme Lord, is with Sri, with Lakshmi, in the eternal abode called Vaikuntha. So all of this is a beautiful pastime that brings out the glory of devotion, we'll see, because he goes there and he says, O Lord, O immortal and infinite Lord, O protector of the universe, protect me. I have committed an offense against your devotee, and because of that, your Sudarshana Chakra is chasing me. I know you alone can protect me because your very name protects everyone, so please protect me. So he says, with all his heart, he says, Aho Achyuta Ananta Prabho Vishwabhavana. He calls all the names of the Lord, Achyuta, Ananta, Vishwabhavana, Prabhu. please protect me. He says, Ajanata te paramanu bhavam kritam maya agam bhavatah priyanam. He says, without realizing, I made a great sin against your great devotee. Please protect me and please free me of this, because your very name, of course, removes all sin. So here he tries this by saying all his names. He said Achyuta, Ananta, and he's been being a great sage. He's aware. We have already seen the story of Ajamila, and therefore he's aware that the name of the Lord can remove all sins. And in fact, it is true. The name will protect him, but only after the pastime is enacted fully. So when he says this, Bhagavan replies, and it is one of the most beautiful passages of Bhagavatam where Bhagavan glorifies his devotee. So normally we see in Bhagavatam again and again various stutis where various devotees glorify Bhagavan. Brahma himself has glorified, and so many sages have glorified, and many have glorified Bhagavan as the source of everything and as the uh, owner, the proprietor, the enjoyer of the whole universe, as the wielder of Maya. So many ways in which he is glorified. And here Bhagavan glorifies his devotees. It's one of the most beautiful passages. So he says, my heart has been taken possession of by my devotees, and therefore I am subject to their control and I am not independent, because I am the only beloved of my devotee. So he says right away, Ambarisha is such a great devotee that I have no control over him. He has control over me. So this is the glory of Bhagavan. He says, Aham Bhakta Paradhino, he aswatantra ivadvaja. He says, Bhakta Paradhino, I am completely taken possession of by my bhaktas, my devotees, and aswatantra, I am therefore not even independent when it comes to my devotees. He says, Sadhubir grasta hridayo bhaktair bhakta janapriya. Therefore, he says, I am always subject to the control of such devotees, and therefore, in true sense, I am not independent when it comes to my devotees, because I am the beloved of my devotees and they are my beloved. He says, apart from my pious devotees for whom I am the highest goal, I covet nothing myself, he says. So beautifully, he says, all the devotees covet Bhagavan. They want the presence of Bhagavan. They want to realize Bhagavan in their heart. And Bhagavan here says, I only covet my devotees. So he says, Naham Atmanam Ashase Mad Bhaktai Sadhubhir Vina Shriyam Cha Atyantikim Brahman Yesham Gati Rahampara. So I do not even covet Sri, my consort. I do not even covet my own self, but I covet my devotee. So this is the compassion of the Supreme Being, that he says, more than my own self is dear my devotees who give up everything. Why? Because he says, how can I forsake them who have renounced everything for me? He says, my devotees have renounced their wife, their house, their children, their relations, their wealth, everything, and sought me as their only refuge. How can I forsake them? He says, Ye dara gara putra aptan pranan vittam imam param hitva mam sharanam yataha katam tam tyaktum utsahe. He says, how can I give them up? So we see Ambarish, even though he was ruling the kingdom, he did not have any attachment to the kingdom, to the wife, to the wealth, to the children. His only attachment was to Bhagavan. And therefore, Bhagavan here says, when a devotee like Ambarish is so devoted to me, his only attachment is me, he has walked away from everything else that is considered dear by men and taken me as his only refuge. He says, Mam Sharanam Yataha, he has come to my Sharanam, my refuge. How can I forsake him? He says, therefore, pious souls who have fastened their heart onto me and look upon everyone with the same eye, they are the one who truly please me as a virtuous wife pleases her husband. So again, a beautiful example given by Bhagavan here, a beautiful simile. He says a virtuous wife through her service wins the heart of a virtuous husband. So both have to be virtuous here. If a wife is virtuous and the husband is taking advantage of it, that is no good. and the other way around is also no good. But a virtuous wife serving a virtuous husband and a virtuous husband taking care of a virtuous wife is the right way a marriage happens. And that is the relationship, he says, between my devotees and me. My devotees serve me as a virtuous wife serve the husband, and therefore they win my heart as a virtuous wife wins the heart of the husband. He says, Mai nirbadha hridaya sadavak samadarshanaha vashi kurvanti mam bhaktya satstriyaha satpatim yatha. So they vashi kurvanti means they simply capture my heart through two things. He says through devotion and through seeing everyone with the same eye. So this is the beauty of this whole teaching of Bhagavatam, is that it is not simply devotion that ignores other beings, but he says samadarshanaha, by seeing everyone with the same eye and by being devoted to me, they please me. And he says, being completely satisfied with this devotion, they do not even desire mukti. And how can they covet anything else if they are not even coveting mukti? So mukti is liberation. He says, Mat sevaya pratitam cha salokya adi chatushtayam na icchanti sevaya purnah kuto anyat kala vidrutum. So he says, they do not even care for liberation. There are four types of liberation that is mentioned: salokya, samipya, sarupya, sayujya. Salokya means being in the same realm as Bhagavan. Samipya means being near Bhagavan. Sarupya means having the same form as Bhagavan, and Sayujya means merging into the being of Bhagavan. So these four types of mukti or liberation are defined, and he says they are not interested in any of them. They are only interested in serving me, and they are satisfied with this sense of service without any interest in any of these types of mukti, let alone then anything in the world that can attract people. So when they are so dedicated that they don't even care for liberation, then how can I forsake them? He says, pious devotees are my very heart, and I am their very heart. They do not see anything other than me, and I do not see anything other than them. So it's such a beautiful verse. This verse, every single verse, so wonderfully Bhagavan glorifies pure devotees. He says, Sadhavo hridayam mahyam sadhunam hridayam twaham. He says, the heart of my devotees is me, and sadhunam hridayam twaham. I am the heart of them. So I am their heart and they are my heart. Madanyat tena jananti naham tebhyo managapi. They don't know anything other than me, and I do not know anything other than them. So this is why in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, Pratijanihi Arjuna, me bhaktah na pranashyati. He says, boldly declare, O Arjuna, that my devotee never perishes. Because if one fully surrenders to Bhagavan, then Bhagavan takes care of him completely. And this has been given in so many verses in Bhagavad Gita, but this particular verse where Krishna asks Arjuna to declare, he says, O Arjuna, declare boldly that my devotee never perishes. Because here Bhagavan says, they are my heart, I am their heart, they know nothing but me, and I know nothing but them. Madanyat tena jananti naham tebhyo managapi. Such a beautiful verse. And therefore, I have essentially, Bhagavan says, I have nothing I can do to protect you. So this is the most beautiful story which brings a totally unique and wonderful rasa or sweet flavor, where Bhagavan, who is invincible, who has been seen in Bhagavatam in various avatars and in various pastimes as doing the most extraordinary things, here he declares his helplessness. And this is the greatest expression of love. So he says, I can do anything in any time, but when I'm bound by love, then that renders me dependent on the one who loves me. And so Bhagavan tells Durvasa, he says, I have one way for you. Finally, he says, the way you have is you have to seek the one on whom you committed this sin and who is my dear devotee. He says, I point to you a means of escape. Seek him alone, because of whom this punishment is coming back to you, because the one who is totally devoted to me, he has the power alone, not me. So Bhagavan says, therefore, you have to go to Ambarisha himself. And then further he wants Durvasa that normally knowledge, wisdom, asceticism are all great and give the highest benediction, but if they are lacking in modesty, then they will give contrary results. He says, Tapo vidyacha vipranam nishreya sakare ubhe taeva durvinitasya kalpete kartur anyatha. So he is gently chastising Durvasa that, hey Durvasa, you were doing meditation in Yamuna, you were meditating on the supreme infinite Brahman, you are a great sage, you have all these mystic powers, you have all the wisdom, and yet you lacked modesty, you lacked humility, you took offense for something that you ought not to have taken offense because of your arrogance as a great sage. You look down on a humble devotee of mine, and therefore, he says, it came back to hurt you. The force you employed against a virtuous being when you are acting out of lack of modesty comes back to hurt you. Therefore, he says, approach King Ambarisha and seek forgiveness of that great soul that alone can solve this problem. He says, Brahman tadgacha bhadram te nabhaga tanayam nripam kshamapaya mahabhagam tatakshantir bhavishyati. He says, therefore, you have to go to Ambarisha, the great Bhagavata, who has bound me by cords of loving devotion that I cannot do anything about this. Only he has the power to free you, so go to him. So, with this, Bhagavan completes his glorification of his devotees and the power of loving surrender that alone conquers the unconquerable Supreme Being. And Ambarisha is a prime example of that. So, with this chapter ends. We'll now see how Durvasa goes to Ambarish and how the great Mahabhagavata Ambarish responds to Durvasa. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.